Welcome to This Explainer. When we picture ancient monastic life, it's so easy to imagine this perfectly serene, silent existence, right? Just monks sitting quietly under trees, meditating for days on end in total harmony. Well, actually, scratch that. The reality of managing a massive, rapidly growing community of monks was vastly different. We're talking about organizing hundreds of people, building complex infrastructure from literally nothing, and actively working to prevent disease. What they needed wasn't just some abstract airy philosophy. They needed a hardcore operations manual. And as you'll see, that is exactly what the ancient texts provide.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover ancient monastic management, building and daily infrastructure, medicine and hygiene, etiquette and public image, and finally, the deep compassion behind all these rules. Let's dive in. First up, Section 1, Ancient Monastic Management and Practical Problem Solving. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to imagine the context. The Buddha was essentially the CEO of a rapidly booming community. And look, whenever you get large groups of humans living together, you are inevitably going to get everyday human problems, right? I'm talking arguments, messes, totally unexpected logistical nightmares. The solutions had to be practical. Enter the Vinaya. This was the regulatory framework and monastic code of the Buddhist community. Think of it functioning much like a modern, iterative organizational management manual. These rules, they weren't just handed down from the heavens as abstract dogma, not at all. Instead, they evolved completely organically. So a monk would do something, well, problematic. The community or the lay public would complain. The issue would be escalated to the Buddha, and a specific rule would be created in direct response. It was an incredibly agile, responsive management system. Okay, moving right along to Section 2, Building and Daily Infrastructure, or as I like to call it, Trial and Error. Let's take the very real issue of sanitation. At first, monks were just relieving themselves, well, anywhere, which, as you can guess, caused major complaints. So the New World dropped, do it in one designated place. But that just created one giant concentrated mess. So the text outlines this brilliant step-by-step transformation. Step 1, dig a pit. Easy enough, right? But then the edges got super muddy and ruined their feet. So, step 2, add footrests made of bricks or wood. Awesome. But then people could still see them. Step 3, add a privacy screen. Still, they were awkwardly bumping into each other, so finally, step 4, add a door. It's like watching a giant puzzle come together. They literally engineered a latrine system through pure iterative problem solving. And the urinal system upgrades followed a very similar path of surprising engineering detail. Seriously, listen to this. They started by using dedicated pots. Great, but the pots filled up fast. The solution? Add a hole at the bottom for drainage. Perfect. But wait, then the smell became an issue, so they added lids to control the odor. However, completely sealing it caused gas buildup problems, so they had to open small holes in the lids specifically for gas to escape. Guys, this is essentially the ancient precursor to modern plumbing vents. It is absolutely fascinating to see this level of systematic, hygiene-focused engineering in an ancient religious text. And it wasn't just sanitation. Even highly relatable homeowner problems were systematically addressed. The text actually describes an instance where a wealthy patron built this massive, beautifully decorated monastery, but the roof leaked. The Buddha's instruction was pretty straightforward. Put a thicker cover on it. When the wind blew that cover away, the instruction was to add pegs. When the pegs leaked, they added specific covers over the pegs. It's so practical. Every time a new physical challenge popped up, whether it was fixing a leaky roof, building staircases because rooms were completely inaccessible, or adding railings so people wouldn't literally fall off, the rulebook adapted to solve the problem. Which brings us to Section 3, Medicine, Health, and Hygiene, their take on practical healthcare. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer variety of highly specific remedies permitted for respected elders in the community. For instance, Elder Sariputra suffered from something called Wynn's disease, and the prescribed treatment was actually boiled garlic in milk or taking warm oil baths. Another elder suffered from hot blood disease, and the text permitted a treatment involving heated stones placed in milk using metal tongs. I mean, wow. For eye pain, Elder Palindavatsa was allowed to inhale medicinal smoke, and the text goes so far as to detail exactly how to design the precise tubes so they wouldn't burn their hands or waste the smoke. And for itchy skin caused by oil treatments, they were instructed to make a specialized soap from ground beans and grasses. But of course, these medical exemptions came with some incredibly strict boundaries. While garlic was totally allowed as a medicine, it required intense public health protocols to prevent that strong odor from disturbing the rest of the community. If you were taking the garlic treatment, you were essentially in full-blown quarantine. You absolutely could not approach the Buddha or the senior teachers. No way. You couldn't use shared latrines or baths. You had to dig a separate pit just for your personal use. You had to stay in a segregated room on the edge of the property, and once you were finally healed, you had to thoroughly wash all your bedding and sweep the floors before returning. It's just a really perfect balance of compassionate healthcare and strict communal consideration.
Let's transition over to Section 4, Etiquette and Public Image, or the monastic PR department.
Because the survival of the monastic community relied entirely on the goodwill and donations of the lay public, their image was absolutely paramount. And naturally, you know how it is. Every organization has those people who just love to push the boundaries. In this text, we repeatedly encounter the Group of Six. They are this recurring group of monks who constantly tested the limits. Honestly, they're the ancient equivalent of difficult coworkers. A huge portion of this HR manual exists specifically because the leadership had to constantly, and I mean constantly, create rules in response to their daily antics.
Oh, the Group of Six racked up quite a list of rapid-fire infractions. They were caught eating while sitting on odd wooden blocks. They actually tried sharing a single bowl to eat out of. They got reprimanded for wearing layperson clothes, which completely blurred the lines of their monastic identity. They were even spotted carrying umbrellas into people's homes, acting more like royalty or government ministers rather than humble monks. They even got in trouble for chewing overly long willow branches for oral hygiene, which the public apparently found completely undignified. Each of these slightly ridiculous antics forced the leadership to establish very clear immediate boundaries for public decorum and humility.
Even minor details like spitting were heavily regulated to ensure the monks maintained a respectable, hygienic image. For example, monks were initially spitting directly on the clean ground, which obviously ruined the aesthetic and hygiene of the space. But the solution wasn't just to scold them and tell them to stop. It was an infrastructural one. They were instructed to use a spittoon. And, to prevent any unpleasant sights or smells, that spittoon had to be filled with ash and sand to absorb everything. It was all about maintaining an absolutely immaculate public face.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the compassion behind the rules, looking at the ethical core. So up until now, we've really been looking at logistics, right? But the true core of this text is deeply ethical. To understand this, we have to look at a very strict requirement. Monks must always carry a water filter. They were strictly forbidden from traveling without one, under penalty of a specific infraction. The purpose was actually profound. They needed to filter their drinking water so they would absolutely avoid killing any unseen insects. This seemingly mundane piece of infrastructure, just a simple water filter, actually sets the stage for the most powerful and dramatic story in the entire text. The text tells this intense story of two monks traveling through a remote area to finally meet the Buddha. They run completely out of water and eventually find a puddle, but it's swarming with tiny insects. And they don't have their water filters. This creates a terrifying dilemma. One monk, the monk who drank, decides to break the rule. He reasons that if he dies, he'll never get to meet the Buddha and hear the teachings, right? So he drinks the bug-infested water just to save his physical life. The other monk, the monk who refused, makes the exact opposite choice. He chooses to uphold the rule of compassion, refusing to kill the insects even to save himself. He actually dies of thirst on the side of the road. But the text tells us he is instantly reborn in the heavens, where he immediately sees the Buddha's true, radiant Dharma body, the ultimate spiritual essence of enlightenment.
Now, the monk who drank the water eventually makes it to the Buddha, totally expecting praise for surviving, but instead, he receives a poetic and incredibly powerful rebuke. The Buddha reveals his radiant form to the surviving monk and says, "What is the point of seeing my impure physical body? Fools are like moths drawn to a flame." Wow. He tells the surviving monk that by breaking the rule of compassion, he is spiritually much farther away from the Buddha than the monk who died. This single moment completely shifts our understanding of the entire Vinaya. It proves these rules are not merely about physical management, HR, or keeping the monastery clean. They are ultimately about unshakable spiritual purity.
Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to consider. We started by looking at how to dig latrines and fix leaky roofs, but we end here. Is true discipline about managing the physical body, or is it ultimately about purifying the mind? Well, this ancient manual shows us that it's actually both. The physical discipline creates the container for the spiritual purity. It's far more than just a list of chores or an ancient HR manual. It is a brilliantly structured guide to elevated living. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive leaves you wanting to learn more about the profound wisdom that can be hidden in even the most practical, everyday rules.